Okay, this is notes number 10, section 2. It says analyzing conditional statements. Make sure you put your name, date, and period. Our essential question is, how do you rewrite a biconditional statement? Well, a biconditional statement is when you have the first sentence and then you put if and only if, and then you write the converse. Our first statement here, vocabulary, is a conditional statement. Is basically a logical statement that has two parts, and the parts are broken up into a hypothesis and a conclusion. Typically, the conditional statement will be written in an if-then form. And if-then form is a conditional statement that is a logical argument that is written in the if part contains the hypothesis, and then after the word then, it will be the conclusion of your sentence. Okay. Then we have a negation that may take place, and a negation is when you say the opposite of the original statement. So usually it contains a not in your statement. Okay. You have the converse, which is the conditional statement where the hypothesis and conclusions are switched in their order. You flip it. The inverse statement is when the hypothesis and conclusion are actually negated. So basically you take the if-then and you negate it. And then you have a contrapositive. That is, you use the converse statement, which was switched, and you negate it. This is a bunch of writing exercise today on logicness. We also have equivalent statements. That's when two statements are either both true or they're both false. They'll be equivalent. We have a definition, perpendicular lines. Two lines that intersect forming a right angle is the definition of perpendicular lines. And we also have a definition of biconditional statements. It's a statement that contains the phrase if and only if. And this is where it has the if-then and it has the converse at the end. Alright, on our first example, we want to write this in the if-then form, then we're going to change it to a converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. If I look at this statement, basketball players are athletes. This first part here, basketball players, is where I'm going to create my hypothesis. This is where I'm going to start with my hypothesis. And then the second part here is where I'm going to draw my conclusion. So I have to dream up an idea, see, that starts out with if, and then you need a subject, so I'm going to say if you are a, and then here's where I put in my hypothesis, a basketball player then, okay, so here's my hypothesis. My conclusion pulls in, then you are an athlete. So that I can see this right here is my hypothesis. And after the then, you're an athlete represents my conclusion. Okay. The converse statement tells me up here that I'm going to take the hypothesis and the conclusion and I want to switch it. Okay, that's a very important word. It's going to switch. So if I look at my statement, my conclusion was you are an athlete. So that becomes my if you are an athlete, then, and then on this part of it, I put the hypothesis. You are a basketball player. Okay. So this is it switched. The inverse statement, I look up here, the inverse, I go back to where I have the hypothesis and conclusion of my conditional statement. So I'm back to my original form, but I have to negate it. So I've got to put a not in there. So I go back to my original, the inverse goes back to the original. And I put if you are not a basketball player, then, and here I have to put the conclusion, I have to, so my conclusion is then you are not an athlete. There I have in both of those the not. And then on the last one, the contrapositive. The contrapositive goes to the converse, because it says we're going to take the converse and negate it. So if I look at my converse, it says if you are an athlete, so I'm going to negate it and say if you are not an athlete, then you are not a basketball player. Okay, so there I have written my sentences, but I got to do one last thing because it says decide whether each statement is true or false. So we got to look at this. Use your logic here. If you're a basketball player, are you going to be an athlete? Yes, you are. If you are an athlete, does that mean that you're a basketball player? No, that does not. You can play other sports. You don't have to just play basketball. So if you are not a basketball player, then you are not an athlete. Is that true or false? That would have to be a false statement, right? If you are not a basketball player, then you are not an athlete. It's not true. You could be a football player, baseball player, and still be an athlete. So that's a false statement. And then the last one, if you are not an athlete, then you are not a basketball player. Not an athlete, then you are not a basketball player. That would have to be true. Okay, on number 2, it says decide whether the statement is true or false. If it is false, provide a counterexample. It says the equation 4x minus 3 equals 12x plus 2x has exactly one solution. Well, if I actually solve the problem to see what my solution is, I can kind of test it. Here I'm going to subtract 2 from there and get 2x minus 3 equals 12. I'm going to add 3 and get 15. That gives me 2x divided by 2 tells me x is equal to 7.5. Do I have exactly one solution? Yes, I do. That is a true statement. There isn't any other way I can get an answer from that problem. Okay. If I look at B, same scenario. Is this true or false? If it's false, give the counterexample. So here's my hypothesis, is I have x squared equals 36. The conclusion is that x equals 18 or equals negative 18. Well, if I look at this, x squared equals 36. To get rid of the square, I take the square root of 36. And the square root of 36 is either 6 or negative 6. It is not 18. So this is false. And this is my example. Okay. On number 3, write the converse of each true statement. So here's our statement, and we want to write the converse of this. If the converse is also true, then we're going to combine it to write a true biconditional statement. Okay, so we're going to first write the converse, see if it's true. If it is true, then we're going to rewrite the statement into one sentence. Okay, so if I'm looking at my problem, let me get my light blue. If two angles are supplementary, this is my hypothesis, then starts my conclusion. Realize it does not include the then, it's after the then their conclusion is their sum is 180. So the converse means I need to flip these, switch the order. So if I write it, that will be if two angles, I need my subject, two angles sum is, or sums, 180 degrees, then they are supplementary angles, or supplementary. Okay, is this true? If any two angles sum together to equal 180 degrees, are they classified as being supplementary angles? That is a true statement. Okay, so here we go. We've got to write this in a biconditional statement. To do so, we're going to state the hypothesis again. Two angles are supplementary. And then I'm going to insert the words if and only if. And then I'm going to write the conclusion. If their sums is 180 degrees. Now realize, a biconditional statement, when you write it, you must have the hypothesis and the conclusion separated by an if and only if, and also both statements must be true. That's very, very important to answer your essential question. Alright, number 4, rewrite the biconditional statement as a conditional statement and its converse. So here they want us to break it apart. Notice here in the center we have the if and only if. So that means the front side here is my hypothesis, and then after the if and only if, I have my conclusion. So to write my first statement, my if then, okay, I want to start with the word if. Say if two lines are perpendicular, then I write the conditional statement. They intersect to form right angles. Okay. When I want to write the converse, I have to write both of them. The converse, I'm now going to flip the order. I'm going to write the conclusion first. If two lines intersect got too many E's in there, to form right angles, then, and now the second part here is my hypothesis. They are perpendicular. Okay, and do notice one thing, is that on all my statements I do have the actual subject listed in the front, and then the pronoun is second. So make sure you notice this, so that even up here, two angles, and then they, there's the pronoun, And on the previous page, you are a basketball player, then you are, well, that one's not very vague. That's both pronouns. But make sure when you have a subject matter, it goes in the hypothesis section. The front, it's with the if statement, and then the pronoun goes in the conclusion segment. Okay, so here you go. Your independent practice is to deal with this statement, all cats are mammals. And this is like your example. You're going to write this in an if-then form, the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. And it looks just like this. I accidentally copied that over. Didn't mean to. But this is your statement. All cats are mammals. Write the four forms and tell me whether it's true or false. Do not forget to answer your summary on how to write a biconditional statement.